Okay, great.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Where I'm From 97 with Katie, my friend from writing group. Her name is Katie, but her pen name is Catherine. So that's why I stumbled over her name. I know her name. I'm reading Late Migrations. I actually read it by Margaret Rankle. I loved it so much. Have you read it, Katie?
I haven't read it. What is it about?
It is a memoir in pieces, which is a category that I'm just newly familiar with. It's
Okay.
like a memoir and essays, but it's pieces. So I took a little workshop with Beth Gephardt, and this was one of the ones she suggested. It's like Maggie Smith's new book is also a memoir in pieces. You could make this place beautiful.
Yeah.
She is a nature writer for the New York Times. So there's a lot of reflections on nature, but it's also a lot about where she's from. So I love things that really dig deep into these like childhood memories of place and
Mm-hmm.
the smells and she goes so deep in there to the smell of the soil and the trees and
Oh,
her
I love that.
descriptions of like not having AC, and I believe it's rural Alabama, and the fan that she worried was going to cut off her limb if she got,
Mm.
because it was a
Yeah.
huge like box fan in the window. And I just,
Yeah.
it was really evocative, and I thought it was beautiful. So that's me.
Um,
What are you
eh,
reading?
well, I am reading Anne Patchett's The Dutch House,
I've
the
read that.
Dutch, which is good.
Hmm.
But I did just finish Maggie Smith's
Hmm.
memoir. And I actually listened to it because I was driving for hours.
Did
And I
she read
liked
it?
it. What's that?
Did she read it?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
you can tell she's in it. And I also think the concept of memoir in pieces probably more accurately captures what it is like to live
Yeah.
a life in fragments.
Yes. Which is something I struggle with. It was something I really struggled with before I started writing, because I'm like, how do you, I felt this pressure to tell a linear narrative with beginning, middle, and
Mm,
end. And I didn't know how I was ever going to do that. And then
yeah.
you realize the deeper you get into memoir and the more you read, um, I'm not really worried about being a bestseller either way. So it's like trying to figure out just how to tell the story where it feels the most authentic. And so I love these kinds of memoirs because I think that's how most people's brains work, but it's certainly how
Yeah.
my brain works.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I think you're right. Most people's brains work that way.
Right? Where you're
I,
constantly sort of like leapfrogging around
yeah.
and something like sparks something that sparks, or it's a spiral, or, it's
Yeah.
just, so I really enjoy it. And she has actual like interviews. I think they're interviews from her grandmother. So that's really
Oh, that's
beautiful.
cool.
I'm fascinated by people telling their own stories like after they're gone. I think that's a really interesting, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm interested in people's stories, obviously. So,
Yay.
um, is there anything you would like to share before you read your poem?
This is so tangential. So forgive
Perfect.
me.
That's so on topic to what we were
It's
just
both
talking about.
tangential and connected. But when I teach the modernists and T.S. Eliot and Virginia Woolf, and I always give that talk about, I know it seems like they're just in need of a good editor or something, like why couldn't she be linear, Virginia Woolf? And I say, it's very intentional. They're trying to capture the way the mind really does work.
Mhm.
So it may seem like they're going all over the place in tangents, but um, if you stop and think about it, that's actually kind of how our minds work.
I
Yeah.
agree. And
Yeah.
I can't even remember what book I read recently. They were talking about, she was talking a lot about Virginia Woolf. I read a lot of books and then they become one book, and then
Yeah.
eventually uh, but talking about Woolf and her mental illness and how she's also, grappling with that. And actually
Yeah.
might have been Margaret Rankle, like that there's also that piece where you're trying to make that concrete or tangible
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
to someone who doesn't understand ostensibly, because
Right.
especially back then you felt like everyone else was normal.
Yeah. I know. Okay. So I have a question. Can you hear my dog he's like making these noises, and
No,
there are crows outside too that are calling, and I'm like,
no.
it's
I
like
love
animal
crows though,
kingdom up
and
in here.
dogs. Well, I also love all of
Okay.
that. I think there are friends. I
Yes.
the ones
Who
across the street from
sometimes
my
interact.
house. I always feel like, hi, how's it going?
Oh, yeah.
No, I can't hear
Yeah.
them. So it's you.
Okay.
No supporting
Okay.
voices.
Well, if you hear it, it's not like some weird Edgar Allan Poe attempt on my part to create sound effects to my life
You
story
just push
of
play. Hmm. You're trying to make it an immersive
it's just
experience. I
the
appreciate
crow or the raven.
that. All right.
Okay. So I shall read.
Yes, please.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So I am from old hardbound encyclopedias, from Jello and Tang. I am from the grass by the kidney-shaped pool, bladed, never soft. It cut through my toes. I am from impatience, blotches of red planted by my mother in brown barrels scattered across the yard. I'm from Scrabble and competition, from Boppy and Marjorie. I'm from the fighters and the planners, sometimes the panickers. From Hush Now and Just Sit Still. I'm from atheists who decided too young that there is no God. I'm from Detroit, lakes like oceans, the paupers on the second boat to Jamestown, the filles du roi who arrived in New France but trailed south, chicken pot pie and whitefish. From the grandfather who drank too much and picked a fight with Robert McNamara. From the secret wedding of my grandmother, one state away. In the musty basement of the cottage on the lake are boogie boards, silver, boxes of photographs, spools of film. Upstairs in the back of the bunkroom closet is my wedding dress, zipped in a vinyl bag for 25 years. I am from these remnants of water play and formal dinners, broken hearts and wild parties, a flash of the camera that made permanent a smile, an off glance, the imprint of a thought or a question on a cool summer night. Yay, thank you.
That
That
was
was fun.
beautiful. And
Oh gosh.
I loved it so much. We have so much in common.
Yeah.
From an entirely selfish perspective, I was like, I love it when the poems remind me of things that,
Yeah.
like impatience, which is something that it's such a funny name, I think, particularly to a young
I
child. And
yes.
I thought it was spelled the same. Of course I did. I didn't know it was spelled, I didn't know it was a different word.
I
I
know.
thought that was the
And I
flower.
always pronounce it with the T at the end,
Yes, yes.
because why not?
Impatient.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, so those like and I have had the privilege of reading some of Katie's writing outside of this
Mhm.
poem, and so the kidney shaped pool had a different
Oh
resonance
yeah.
for me than it might have for someone else. And it was
That's
just it's interesting how then it pops up again.
it
This
does. A lot of life took
yeah,
place on that pool and a
yeah,
lot of near death.
yeah. It's a
Yeah.
great story. As in great meaning really hard, but it stuck with me. So when you said kidney shaped pool, it's like, oh my God, the pool.
Oh yeah.
Um, and
Yeah.
then are you in this cabin right now? Where
You
you're
know what's funny is
yeah.
I am. So I'm on in the cabin on Lake Michigan. And I have my kids up here with me. And I'm at it's my parents'
Mhm.
place. So I've literally been coming up to northern Michigan since I was born, really.
Mhm.
So it really is it wasn't like the first, I don't know, home that I lived in while I was going to school, blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
But it was a place we escaped to pretty regularly. So it's really peaceful. And I always say that like all the good things happen up here.
Mhm. That's
and
beautiful.
they do. Yeah, they it's just a really, really peaceful, beautiful place where you just spend your every day outside, and that's where I like to be. So yeah.
Yes. And I also, when I was, lakes like oceans
Yeah.
also like resonated for me because my mother's from Wisconsin, and then I went to college in Illinois. And I remember when I went there, I missed the ocean because I was living in Colorado. And I remember seeing Lake Michigan and saying, well, it's like an ocean,
Yeah.
like you can't see the other side.
Can't
It's,
see that. I mean, you can sail for hours and
yes.
hours and hours and
Yes.
hours and
Yes. And
not
when
get,
you fly over them, it's always like kind of this, it hits you. I don't know. It always hits me in a certain way flying over
yeah.
them. They're,
Yeah.
they're just fast. Truly. They are
Yeah.
great.
They are.
Um,
Yeah.
I thought of you too in your writing, talking about how you were such an active child. And I could just feel
Mhm.
that through your whole poem,
Oh,
like,
that's interesting. Yes. Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I was very active. I was a little bit hyper.
that
Put
was
it
the word
mildly.
back then, right? That's not the word now, obviously, but that was definitely the word, hyper, you know.
Yeah, I was very hyper. I was always on the move physically. I mean, it was really hard to sit still.
Mm-hmm.
And I really liked to be in motion, and usually like doing something that maybe was a little bit potentially dangerous to me and others. Yeah, so always kind of physically on the move, and yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't realized that.
That's what I felt. And I mean, that might be partially because I've, talked to you and read some of your other writing, but I just felt kind of this like active. And even the names Boppy and Marjorie and Fighters, and like there's just this kind of, obviously there's Hush Now and Just Sit Still, but just this kind of orientation to activity.
Yeah.
Um, and I laughed out loud when your grandfather picked a fight with Robert McNamara, because who wouldn't like to pick a fight with him,
Yeah. I
especially
mean,
back then.
what's so weird about that too is um it was both when they worked in the automobile industry.
Oh, okay.
And my grandfather was a little he was a total alcoholic, and um he but he also was responsible for marketing for the car company that put out, was it the Studebaker that like fell apart on the road? But
I think
Robert McNamara, yeah,
I think it
it
was a
was,
different show one, wasn't it? I don't
wasn't
know. This is a Trivial Pursuit question. We are not getting our pie piece.
I know.
We both want to get it.
I know. I've actually written about this too, and I can't even remember what the name of the car was, but um he was convinced that when Rocker McNamara was the head of the automobile company, that he set my grandfather up to fail by knowing that the car was going to literally fall apart on the road, which it did. And so like my joke is like my grandfather, like his life literally became a car crash, like wheels came off, all the puns.
Mm-hmm.
um it sounds like I'm being really terrible, but I didn't know him very well. So,
I don't think you're being really terrible.
and
He sounds like an alcoholic. I mean, not to be,
he was not a kind man.
right.
So
I mean, not to
yeah.
be reductive, but lots of times when you struggle with addiction, your life does become a car crash at some
Yeah,
point. That's just
that's
sort of
right.
how it works.
Yeah. And
Um,
he was obsessed for decades with McNamara, saying
oh yeah.
McNamara set him
Oh
up.
man, I can
It
just
was
imagine it.
intentional. McNamara was afraid he was gonna
Right.
become the head of the
Yes.
company.
Well, the
So it was
paranoid
always,
delusions are very familiar to anyone who's been around an addict or an
oh
alcoholic.
yeah. Hey, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
they're out to get me. Like,
Yeah.
seems,
And
seems like you're doing a good enough job. They don't need to do much.
right.
Kidding.
It might have been, I don't know. I mean, I think it was after all of that that he actually really kicked up the
Mm.
drinking. But yeah. So
Anyway, I just thought I loved that story and it made me laugh. So what was it like for you to write this poem, Katie, especially as you are in the midst of writing your memoir?
oh yeah. Um it was it was interesting. It was fascinating. It truly was to write this. I loved kind of the assignment. And it made me think about patterns, right?
Yeah.
So, um, I think sometimes I look back and I'm like, there is a little bit of kind of a hardness, maybe,
Mm.
um, that I think about. I mean, even when I think about the lakes, like my father, when he was, 18, was like out on a freighter working like a coal freighter, when he was like in college during the summers. And um I think made me think about land,
Mhm.
water, land, kind of physical engagement with all of that, and also maybe survival, a little bit of toughness,
Mhm.
a lot of toughness, maybe like
Mhm.
my mother or my grandmother who had the secret marriage. It was when she knew if she was discovered to be a married woman, she would lose her job because
Mhm.
um that would be seen as a job that was
Mhm.
taken from a man somehow, right?
Mhm.
If you're married, you don't need a job as a woman because your husband has the job.
And
So
there were
she,
some jobs where you just weren't, like, my mother was a flight attendant, and before the union rewrote the rules, that was also once you married or got to like 26, I mean, a ridiculously or a young age.
it's time to
You were
resign.
for yeah, you got nothing for us. Get out.
You're
Um,
right. Yeah. Right.
so I mean, that was something that I don't think people think about or talk about as much. But
Yeah.
yeah, women were incredibly disposable, and nobody
Yeah.
even tried to hide it. It was just
I
get out.
know. Yeah. So she snuck off to Ohio and
Mhm.
eloped in secret to preserve her job, came back to Michigan, told one person, kept to keep it a secret, told one person that she had gotten married. That person shared it with the employer and she was fired.
Jesus.
It was like, that
God.
was it. I know.
And I think that's an interesting for me because a lot of, I think of our generation and younger talk a lot about family secrets and how they don't serve anyone and how, so many of
Mhm.
us are still trying to like open the box and unpack everything and try to figure out how it's all connected. And and I think stories like that are valuable because then it helps you have some compassion for why people did keep secrets.
Yeah.
Like I think lots of times there was a belief, and I think truth often, that the secrets were connected to survival. Just to go back
Mm.
to your topic where you were talking about the poem and survival, I think lots of times the secrets were attached to their own survival.
I think that's a really good point. And I also think it's such a different mindset because now the barrier between private and public with social media,
Yeah.
it's just here are my innermost thoughts about my breakup, you know, last night, and
Yeah.
people like sobbing openly and recording themselves sobbing intentionally. And I'm like, I don't know if that's a good idea. It's not a good idea.
I'm grateful it's not a choice I had to make. Like that social media is now when I'm at a place where
That's right.
it's like not, I mean, it's the thing, like, I don't know who said it, but right from the scar, not from the wound. And
Mm,
I think there is value in writing from the wound. I don't want to do it. And I'm grateful that I'm not still so deep in the things that that's a decision that I have to make,
yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. And I think you're right. Like I okay, so 30 years from now, there will be people saying when social media came out, sometimes people would do these things, right?
Mhm.
That so like, I should probably have more empathy and compassion for people who are using social media in that way. Exposure of self when you're swimming in the wound, right?
Yeah. And I think it does help people to see others going through these things and to not feel
Be
so
vulnerable.
isolated, like, oh, I'm not the only one who's destroyed. But for me
That's right.
personally, I would feel incredibly vulnerable. I already felt vulnerable because I was talking about rape in 1991 and people were shitting on me. So,
Right there with
right,
you, sister.
right, right. And so that was hard enough. like just even saying this happened to me, it was not okay, and having people say, okay, but like get over it.
Right.
Like I know it was hard for you and all that, but like you're cute and you'll move on, or whatever bullshit they told you, you know?
Right.
And so I can't even imagine how I would feel if there was like video of that, or so for me
Yeah.
it's very much my own self-preservation of like how vulnerable I felt, and how re-traumatized I felt advocating for myself and being denied. So when I
Mm.
see that stuff, I'm like triggered, like, oh Jesus, like
Yeah.
I'm grateful that's not something I could have done.
Yeah.
I might have, because I felt so lost, because I think it's such a disconnect. I don't know if you have this similar experience, Katie, but people tell you they're going to like do stuff for you if something bad happens, like they'll kill them, they'll get them, they'll, these are like kind of things you're raised with, like they'll defend your honor or whatever.
Yeah.
And then the thing happens and it's like, actually no. um, uh, let's
Just,
time to
just
edit.
kidding.
Let's go back. Actually, what we're going to do is pretend it never happened. And if you
Yeah.
talk about it, maybe you're the problem. And so that
Okay,
was
so this
rough.
is fascinating because I also think so in a way, social media is about what do we share and what don't we share,
Yeah.
right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that's the question. The stakes were so high in the 90s, not even on social media, but
No.
what do you share and what don't you share, right? So in a way, and then having those two things intersect on social media where someone could be sharing and then having people be weird and cruel
Yeah.
about that is so beyond comprehension. Yeah. So that's really interesting. And so sharing, though, I think in the 90s too was also about sharing in that context was, I think, helpful because nobody had been sharing, right? And then people sharing exactly what you're saying, that they're not alone, that it's not just them. And that can be helpful to people. So I guess maybe that's what's happening in social media in a different way.
Yeah. I hope so. And I just hope these people aren't getting re-traumatized. That would be my main concern. Like, I mean, you share whatever you want to share. Like it's your business. I just don't want them to be getting re-traumatized. And I don't know if you've had this experience, Katie, but I have had friends from that time come back and tell me that they appreciated that I shared about it, and that it did change the way they thought about some experiences they've had. And that
Oh, that's
did
interesting.
help me feel like, oh, I wasn't just like yelling into the void, because it did feel a little like that, because there was so much of like, oh, how terrible that happened to you, that would never happen to me. And then as time has gone on, of course,
Of course.
more people are like, oh, actually, um
Yeah.
uh
Yeah.
and statistically it's like not a club anyone wants to be in, but many, many, many people are in. um
Hmm.
so I do
Yeah.
think it helps to, I mean, it
Yeah.
helps. I think it helps.
Yeah.
It helped me also just to say, like, this is what I'm going through. This is why I don't want to get out of bed. There's a reason,
Mm,
you know.
yeah. It's funny to think, okay, so 1991. Um, I mean,
It's a long
it
time ago.
was, but like
Yeah.
we didn't know each other, but we're going through similar things in different parts of the country. That's interesting.
Yeah. Well, we were that age too, where, I have children who are in that age, and I I watch some of these girls as the world starts treating them differently, and it hits me pretty hard.
Yeah, it's hard to see.
Mhm.
I even once was so my daughter tends to walk ahead. It's just a thing she does. It's fine. I don't mind. It's just a
Oh yeah.
way, I get it. And even like I was hiking with my mom and my daughter, and she was ahead, and my mom was like, "Oh, she's really eager to get to." And I was like, "No, this is just what she does, and it's fine because she wants her space." But I was behind a little ways, and we were walking down the street, and I saw a really sketchy
Mhm.
man start to,
Yeah.
and I was like, "He
I'm
doesn't
gonna
see
kill
me."
you.
I I was like, "He doesn't see me. I'm her mother, and
Uh-huh.
you probably wouldn't even necessarily figure that out. And
Mhm.
I was like, in my head, I'm like, you do it, you do it. I'm gonna come running out and just jump on you. Like, just in my head, like, I dare you, fucker. And, I think in the end, he didn't say anything to her,
Mhm. No,
and
it's
she
just the
wasn't really
looks.
looking at
Yeah.
him. So,
Yep.
then I just got to the door and was like, well, we're all alive, including him. So
Mhm. Mhm.
success.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I mean, I could talk about this topic and all the different anecdotes that speaking of memoir and pieces, like all the different anecdotes over the years from the perspective of being a young woman, being a mother, being a friend, being all the ways that I've interacted with the male gaze or misogyny or patriarchy or whatever label you want to use, and how pervasive it is. Like it's just something you sort of put on before you leave the house, whatever your protective like mental health gear is,
Yes.
um, and that's what I'm watching these girls go through, that change where the world goes from being a place that is feeling more equitable to a place that it's like, oh, I have to be ready for this.
Yeah.
And that's what infuriates me.
And I just think about too, like how much energy
Yeah.
goes to that
Yeah.
that could be going towards writing poetry or
Anything, literally
making
anything.
making money.
Yeah, negotiating for higher pay.
Like, I feel like we should have there should be just a tax that just goes to us for like constant compensation for the bullshit.
Yeah, I'm in. So any last thoughts on this poem or anything
Oh,
else before we wrap up?
well, I guess I'm really grateful to you for
I'm so
giving
glad
me
you
the
came.
chance to do it. And I always just love talking with you. And I also
Same.
love that we can laugh about things, even the hard things.
I do too. I think that is also hopefully helpful to people. Like someday I'll be able to laugh about it. Someday when I think about it, I won't just want to get in the fetal position, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
that you can take back pieces of yourself
Oh,
that
yeah.
someone took.
Yeah. And
Um,
the collective laughter is really helpful.
it is. Oh, my light just went off. That
You've
light
got
was
real
so, I
lighting.
looked less shiny because I'm warm. Um,
I'm very shiny. I'm like,
so, well, thank you, Katie. Thank you to
thank you.
everyone who joined us.
Yeah.
We had a great time. Okay.
Yes. All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye, Al.